Jungkook sat in the dimly lit room, his heart pounding. His shadows danced across the walls. He clenched his fists tightly, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. This wasn't how he had imagined his life, offering himself to a stranger to clear the crushing debts his father had left behind. The door creaked open, pulling Jungkook from his thoughts. A tall, commanding figure entered, his presence immediately filling the room. Jungkook couldn't make out his face, but the air grew heavy, his instincts screaming at him to run. Before he could utter a word, the man crossed the room in long, deliberate strides and leaned down, his lips crashing onto Jungkook's. Jungkook gasped, startled by the intensity, his hands instinctively pushing against the stranger's broad chest. "Wait," Jungkook stammered, his voice shaky. "I need to." The man silenced him with another, his hand gripping Jungkook's jaw firmly, but not painfully. His dominance was overwhelming, yet there was an undertone of control that kept Jungkook frozen in place. "I don't take interruptions," the man growled, his voice deep and smooth, sending chills down Jungkook's spine. Months earlier, the lavish estate of Kim Taehyung was alive with the sound of music and chatter. The grand staircase was the centerpiece, and at its top, Taehyung stood like a king surveying his kingdom. He descended slowly, his black shirt clinging to his toned chest. Rings adorned his fingers, and a silver chain glinted beneath his collar. His sharp jawline and scarred face gave him an air of danger that was impossible to ignore. At the base of the stairs, Yoongi waited patiently, holding a sleek black folder. He raised an eyebrow as Taehyung approached, his smirk as infuriating as it was alluring. "Yoongi," Taehyung drawled, his voice low and commanding. "I trust you've handled everything." "There's tension brewing with the other groups," Yoongi said, his tone calm. "We need to discuss the shipment tonight." Taehyung waved a dismissive hand. "You're capable. Deal with it." "I've got bigger matters to handle," Yoongi sighed but didn't press further. He had long learned that questioning Taehyung's decisions was futile. Jungkook sat on the bed, his trembling hands gripping the sheets. He glanced up, meeting the man's piercing gaze for the first time. The faint light caught the scar on his cheek, the one that seemed to tell 1,000 stories. "You belong to me now," the man said, his voice low and firm. "I'm Taehyung. And from this moment on, I'll decide your fate." Jungkook swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had been prepared for many things, but not for the dangerous man standing before him, whose mere presence promised chaos and control. Jungkook's heart raced as he sat frozen under Taehyung's piercing gaze. Every part of him screamed to resist, but something about the man's aura held him captive. The way Taehyung carried himself, exuding control and dominance, left Jungkook feeling like a moth drawn to a flame, both terrified and entranced. Taehyung took a slow step forward, his boots echoing in the quiet room. "You're scared," he said, his voice soft yet menacing. "Good. Fear keeps people obedient." Jungkook flinched, his fingers tightening around the edge of the bed. "He didn't have a choice." "My father? Your father's mistakes are irrelevant now," Taehyung cut him off, his sharp gaze locking onto Jungkook. "You've made your choice by stepping into my world." Jungkook's lip trembled, but he refused to cry. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Taehyung smirked, leaning down until their faces were inches apart. "Now, you'll do exactly as I say. Obey me, and I'll ensure your father's debt is cleared. Defy me." He trailed off, his smirk growing darker. Jungkook's breath hitched as Taehyung straightened, his broad frame towering over him. He felt small, powerless, but amidst the fear, a spark of defiance flickered in his chest. Months ago, in the smoky confines of an underground club, Taehyung had proven why he was the most feared man in the city. A rival gang leader had dared to challenge him during a negotiation, slamming a fist on the table and accusing him of deceit. Taehyung had leaned back in his chair, sipping his whiskey with a calm smile. "You don't accuse me unless you are prepared to face the consequences," he had said, his tone icy. The man had laughed, but his laughter was cut short when Taehyung's men dragged him outside. Moments later, the rival gang leader was kneeling before Taehyung, his face pale with terror. "You wanted my attention," Taehyung had said, crouching down to meet the man's gaze. "Now you have it. Tell me, how will you earn your forgiveness?" The message was clear. Taehyung didn't tolerate disrespect. Taehyung studied Jungkook, his dark eyes unreadable. "I don't need your loyalty," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Just your obedience." Jungkook clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "And if I refuse?" Taehyung's smirk returned, but this time, it held a glint of amusement. "You won't. Because deep down, you know I am your only way out." Jungkook hated how right he was. As Taehyung turned and walked toward the door, he stopped and looked over his shoulder. "Tomorrow, you'll meet me in my office. Don't be late." And with that, he was gone, leaving Jungkook alone with his racing thoughts and the inescapable feeling that his life would never be the same again. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains, casting faint streaks of gold across the room. Jungkook sat on the edge of the bed, his mind clouded with questions and fears. He had barely slept, haunted by the man's commanding presence and the weight of his words. The knock on the door startled him. A tall, lean man with sharp features entered without waiting for permission. His eyes were cold, assessing Jungkook with a mixture of curiosity and indifference. "I'm Yoongi," the man said simply. "Taehyung sent me to fetch you." Jungkook hesitated but nodded, standing slowly. He followed Yoongi down a series of dimly lit hallways until they reached a grand set of double doors. Yoongi pushed them open, revealing Taehyung seated behind a massive oak desk. Taehyung looked up, his piercing gaze locking onto Jungkook. "You're late." Jungkook swallowed hard, his palms sweating. "No excuses," Taehyung interrupted, his tone firm. He gestured to the chair in front of him. "Sit." Jungkook obeyed as he lowered himself into the seat. "Let's get one thing straight," Taehyung began, leaning forward. "You belong to me now. Your freedom, your decisions, even your future, they're all mine." "But," his lips curved into a smirk, "I'm not entirely heartless. If you prove your worth, I might make things easier for you." Jungkook's fists clenched in his lap. "What do you want from me?" Taehyung chuckled, the sound low and dangerous. "Loyalty. Obedience. And for now, your silence." Jungkook's jaw tightened. "And if I refuse?" Taehyung's eyes darkened, his smirk disappearing. "Then I'll remind you why people fear me." The room grew heavy with tension as the two stared at each other. Taehyung's presence was overwhelming, but Jungkook refused to look away, his determination flickering like a fragile flame. Months earlier, Taehyung had stood alone in his study, staring at a photograph of his younger self with his family. His fingers brushed against the edges of the frame, his jaw clenched as memories flooded back. Yoongi entered quietly, setting a glass of whiskey on the desk. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, his voice softer than usual. Taehyung didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the photo. Loyalty is a rare thing, Yoongi. Even rarer when you're in my position, Yoongi nodded, stepping back. But some of us are still here. Taehyung glanced at him, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes before his usual stoic mask returned. Taehyung stood, his imposing frame casting a shadow over Jungkook. "I'll give you time to adjust," he said, his voice cold but measured. "But don't mistake my patience for weakness." Jungkook rose from his chair, his heart pounding. "Why me?" he blurted out, the words escaping before he could stop them. Taehyung tilted his head, a faint smirk playing at his lips. "Because you're different. And I have a feeling you'll be more valuable than you realize." Before Jungkook could respond, Taehyung turned away, effectively dismissing him. Yoongi appeared at the door, gesturing for Jungkook to follow. As Jungkook walked out of the office, his thoughts swirled with confusion and unease. What did Taehyung see in him? And how far would he have to go to survive in this dangerous new world? Jungkook spent the next few days in the sprawling mansion, an uneasy guest in a place that felt more like a gilded cage. Every corner of the estate exuded wealth and power, from the polished marble floors to the intricate chandeliers that hung like jewels from the ceilings. Yet beneath the luxury, there was an undeniable tension that left Jungkook on edge. He spent most of his time alone, wandering aimlessly through the halls. Taehyung was nowhere to be found, his presence lingering only in the sharp stares of the staff and the distant whispers that seemed to follow Jungkook wherever he went. But as the sun set one evening, Yoongi appeared at Jungkook's door. "Taehyung wants to see you," Yoongi said flatly, his eyes betraying no emotion. Jungkook nodded, his stomach knotting as he followed Yoongi through the maze of hallways. Taehyung was seated by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The warm glow of the flames cast shadows across his sharp features, highlighting the scar that ran down his cheek. He didn't look up as Jungkook entered, instead motioning for him to sit in the chair opposite. Jungkook hesitated before sitting, his gaze fixed on Taehyung. "You've been quiet," Taehyung said, finally breaking the silence. His voice was calm, almost disarming, but Jungkook wasn't fooled. "I don't know what you want from me," Jungkook replied, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. Taehyung leaned back, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I want you to learn, Jungkook. To understand the world you've stepped into. And to realize that your survival depends entirely on me." Jungkook's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for this." Taehyung's lips curled into a smirk. "No one ever does. But you're here now, and you'll adapt, or you'll break. The choice is yours." Months ago, Taehyung had stood in the rain outside an abandoned warehouse, his leather jacket soaked but his resolve unshaken. Across from him, a rival gang leader held out a blunt hand. "This alliance will cost you, Taehyung," the man had said, his voice low and gravelly. Taehyung had smirked, gripping the man's hand in a firm shake. "I don't care about the cost. I care about results." The deal had been struck, and with it, Taehyung's power had grown. But at what price? Taehyung set his glass down, his sharp gaze locking onto Jungkook. "You'll start tomorrow," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Start what?" Jungkook asked, his voice laced with apprehension. "Learning how to be useful," Taehyung replied, standing to his full height. "If you want to survive here, you need to prove you're worth keeping around." Jungkook swallowed hard, his mind racing with questions he dared not voice. "Go," Taehyung said, his tone final. "Yoongi will brief you in the morning." As Jungkook left the room, the weight of Taehyung's words settled heavily on his shoulders. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was certain: his life was no longer his own. The morning sun was harsh as Jungkook stood in the training yard, his breath visible in the cold air. Yoongi had handed him a clear, his expression unreadable. "You'll need to learn," Yoongi said. "Out here, ignorance can go." Jungkook hesitated, the weight of the weapon foreign in his hands. He wasn't a fighter, he didn't belong in this world. But there was no turning back now. "You're hesitating," a deep voice called out from behind. Jungkook turned to see Taehyung standing at the edge of the yard, his arms crossed over his chest. The sight of him was both infuriating and magnetic. "People who hesitate die first," Taehyung said, stepping closer. "Pull the trigger." Now, Jungkook's grip tightened on the gun, his heart hammering in his chest. He aimed at the target, his finger trembling on the trigger. "Focus," Taehyung commanded. "Breathe." And thought rang out, shattering the quiet. Jungkook's shoulders tensed as he watched hit the edge of the target. Far from perfect, but it wasn't a complete miss. "Again," Taehyung ordered, his tones sharp but not unkind. By the time the sun began to set, Jungkook was drenched in sweat, his arms aching from the repeated firing. Yet, he felt a small spark of pride. He had endured. Jungkook sat on the balcony of his room, staring out at the city lights. The weight of the day lingered, but so did the memory of Taehyung's presence, his steady guidance, his unyielding strength. "You did better than I expected." Jungkook jumped, turning to see Taehyung leaning against the door frame, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "I didn't have much of a choice," Jungkook replied, his voice quiet. Taehyung stepped closer, setting his glass down on the small table. "You always have a choice. Survive or surrender." "You chose to survive." Jungkook met his gaze, searching for any hint of softness in those dark eyes. "Why are you helping me?" Taehyung's lips curved into a faint smirk. "Because I see something in you. Strength. Potential. And maybe," he added, his voice dropping slightly, "I don't want to see you break." The honesty in his words caught Jungkook off guard. For the first time, he saw something beneath Taehyung's hardened exterior, something raw and human. Months passed, and Jungkook grew stronger, more confident under Taehyung's guidance. He learned the rules of their world and how to navigate its dangers. But more than that, he learned about Taehyung, the man behind the power, the scar, and the ruthless reputation. Their bonds grew in ways neither of them had anticipated, forged through trials and trust. Jungkook no longer felt like a pawn in Taehyung's game, he was a partner, an equal. One night, as they stood on the rooftop overlooking the city, Taehyung turned to Jungkook, his expression uncharacteristically soft. "This world doesn't forgive weakness," Taehyung said. "But together, we can take it on." Jungkook nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Together, and for the first time in a long while, Jungkook felt hope, a glimmer of light in the darkness of their world.